Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Rissanello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel. Always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Remember, we would encourage all of you out there who can hear us to become a premium member of the Crusade channel. Okay, we couldn't emphasize enough the great lineup that Mike Church, the King Dude, has going on down there. It's the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, Barrett Brief, Kennedy Profession, Frontline with Joe and Joe, and others. It's not a radio station. It's a cause. It's great work that's being done by Mike Church and everybody at the Crusade Channel. We would encourage you all to become premium members. Remember, the chat room is open at crusadechannel.com/chat. And as always, thank you for your prayers. Okay. We really appreciate it. The show is going very, very well, not just on the Crusade channel, but also on the Veritas Catholic Radio Network, where we have a Sunday afternoon at 5 o'clock Eastern time, our interviews. From over this weekend, we had Dr. Edmund Mazza. The podcast is available, so we would encourage you to download the Veritas Catholic Radio Network mobile app. And again, get your information not from Fox News, and heaven forbid, don't get it from MSNBC or CNN, but even Fox News, all right, and many of the others, okay? We're Catholic. We could get a lot of news, stay right up to speed on everything that's going on just by using Catholic media outlets, okay, like the Crusade Channel, like Veritas Catholic Radio Network, and many, many others out there. Support our people. That's what we need to be doing. Not saying shut out everything else, but prioritize all of those that are speaking Catholic truth in this country. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about Catholic truth. And we're going to, Joe, I think, Joe Rissanello, it's fair to say we're going to equally cheese off left-wingers and right-wingers tonight, okay? But you see, but that's what Catholics are supposed to do, because we're neither supposed to be left-wing or right-wing. We're Catholic. That's our worldview, all right? We propose or we support the proposals of the church, which represent the good, the true, and the beautiful in all aspects of life. Tonight, today, it's going to be economics, okay? And specifically, we want to talk about Dan Lipinski, okay, who we don't agree with on everything. He's a Democrat. I find it hard to agree with Democrats on anything. However, okay, he's basically making a pitch. Joe, I think you'd agree with me on that. It almost seemed like a pitch to me, okay, because he went to the Napa Institute. Now, you want right wing? I don't want to call it that. A lot of people consider Napa the Catholic free marketeers, okay? And there's nothing wrong with the free market. We believe in the free market. But for Dan Lipinski to be there, that says a lot, okay? And he was talking about another politician, J.D. Vance, who recently came into the Catholic Church. And what were they talking about, Joe? Economics. And that's a conversation worth having, because obviously that affects us all. Pope Leo had something to say about that 150 years ago. So we're going to be alluding to Pope Leo the Great, okay, Pope Leo, because Rerum Novarum is one of the most important documents in the modern church. Would you agree with that, Joe?
Oh, it's big. Labor.
It's a big one. It's a huge one. And that's why it was reiterated 40 years after it was written by Pope, I believe, Pius XI in Quadragesimo Anno. And then in 1991, on the 100th year anniversary of Rerum Novarum by Pope St. John Paul II in Centesimus Annus, because it's important, because the common good is important. And that's what they're talking about. Plus, we're going to talk about how the Democrats really have abandoned. They really have. If there was ever a time for Republicans to seize an opportunity, okay, it would be now. And we're gonna give them a couple of Joe and Joe suggestions. And then if we get to it, we're going to give you a textbook example of why this 20 to 30% of registered Democrats would run away from that party if the Republicans would give them a reason to. And it's another one of those atrocious examples coming out of the Democrats in the state legislature in Pennsylvania. So we hope that, we get to it all on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. So, Joe, let's start with Dan Lipinski.
Well, we'll just we didn't pray. We'll just give St. Dominic pray for us. Our Lady of Victory pray for us.
Pray for us.
As Joe said, Dan Lipinski had something to say. He was opining in First Things on the common good. And but before we get into the actual verbiage of what he had to say, I think we have to go back and refer to some history. As Joe mentioned, the encyclical by Leo XIII, which was written in 1891, and that is Rerum Novarum. In it, Leo XIII rejected both socialism and unfettered capitalism and urged all individuals and institutions to serve the common good. Though some complained that its public welfare programs and moving the country towards socialism, the Democratic Party was the best option. This is Lipinski, from the point of view of many Catholics, since it was more clearly focused than the GOP on supporting the working class and their families. This is historically speaking. But then in recent years, Marco Rubio spoke on Catholic social teaching. He spoke at Catholic University. We referenced that in a couple shows on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online. Basically, he was championing common good capitalism. And he also quoted Rerum Novarum. And this is what Rubio said at Catholic University. He said, justice demands that the interests of the working class be carefully watched over by the administration so that they who contribute so largely to the community may themselves share in the benefits which they create. Now, obviously, the Democratic Party has changed. It's kind of, well, it's not funny, it's sad, but we've been saying this for a year. I'll be honest with you. Joe and I have been, this is not the Democratic Party of old. And what I want to reference, basically, because I think what happened in England is happening here. And I have a friend that works in Ireland and we talk politics often. The working class has abandoned the Labor Party completely. They're woke and they don't relate to the Labor Party.
Joe, who's abandoned whom, though, real quick?
Well, labor, as in union workers, have abandoned.
It was more of a rhetorical question. It seems to me, now just a quick comment, it's labor. In the case of England, it's labor. It would be called the Democrats here. They've abandoned the working class, is my point.
Correct. And that's what you're seeing here.
Right. Yeah.
And frankly, I think it's going to catch up to them. A lot of people are saying this. And frankly, I'm surprised it didn't catch up to them. Frankly, I mean, you had the whole COVID situation, and obviously it was weaponized politically. But truthfully, the Democrat of old doesn't relate to the Democrat today. And what's his face? The Southern dude from Louisiana. I can't believe I can't.
Steve Scalise.
No. The dude, he was, what's his face?
Oh, John Kennedy?
Clinton's guy, the Raging Cajun.
Oh, Carville.
Carville. He even said this, his exact words. Carville gets it because he's a Democrat, an old Democrat. He said, the language being used at the University of Chicago is not the language being used on the South Side of Chicago. They're not this, and yet it's the same party. I'm telling you, this is a revolution that is happening politically in America. And I'm going to be honest with you, Joe. I think they're going to come up short on it because it's changing. And that's what Lipinski's touching on.
But he's talking about, I've been thinking about this a lot since we decided that we were going to talk about this tonight on the Crusade channel. Okay. You know, you're talking about really what we talk about on the show all the time, which is that the Republicans refuse to break out of political ideology or what you would consider to be conservative ideology, which obviously embraces free markets. And I'm tired of having to make that clear. Joe, let me give you an example. A social safety net under which a person will not be allowed to fall. Okay, because many people take risks. Labor takes risks. We risk when we go to work for a corporation. How do we know that corporation is going to be in business 2, 3, 4 years down the road? We take risks too. But if you take a risk and fail, okay, at the very minimum, I think a decent society would say, all right, you're going to have food, shelter, and clothing and those things that you need to get yourself back on your feet and get out there. To which most people would respond, well, I think we could afford that. We could do that. We're a wealthy nation. We could do that. I hate when people conflate that with communism or socialism. They're not the same thing. Socialism is state ownership of the means of production, or if you want to just say it more literally, it's a step towards state ownership of the means of production. They are not the same thing. You could be a free marketeer and believe that markets, and again, we're going to talk about markets today, okay? But the usefulness of markets to serve the common good are a very good thing, extremely valuable. We value them, but they are not God. They are not to be worshiped. And does it seem to you, I'm going to ask you a question, Joe. Does it seem to you that sometimes there's an idolatry of the market? It's almost like conservatives speak almost fearfully, like you would rightfully speak fearfully of God. Okay. In other words, that I don't want to offend God. They talk that way about markets. Oh, we can't disturb the market. We have to let the market work itself out. Now here's my larger point, and then please comment on it. Joe, the relationship has been inverted. What's meant to serve us and the common good, we are now serving it. And the second that we as individuals are serving the economy, sorry, that's not an economy worth having.
Well, I mean, it's been going on for some time. I mean, the stock market is completely bogus. It's not for the common man. It's completely it's like a balloon. I mean, what is it, like 33,000 or some absurdity? I mean, I remember when it was floating around 10,000. It's just completely, I mean, like, it's run by hedge funds, it's run by mutual funds, it's run by asset management firms. But to your point, I mean, the market isn't God. But this has been going on for some time. I mean, there's always been that conflict. I saw an article today, Joe, that basically said that the 1% of America, which is the oligarchy, which controls America, has more wealth than the entire middle class. See, we're shifting into one of those nations, like in South America. You find wealthy people everywhere. Everywhere, no matter where you go. Malaysia, you can go to the poorest country on the earth. There are wealthy people. How a nation is judged, in my view, is the middle class. It's the regular person, and it's shrinking. It's getting very hard, and that's kind of what Lipinski is alluding to. He's saying that the Democratic Party used to. Now, did they do it perfectly? No, but it was like in lockstep with the common man, and some people are still holding on to those ideas. It simply isn't the case. It isn't the case anymore. Their ideas don't relate to the common man. Talk to people. Listen, I live in New Jersey. I'm outside on Saturday cutting my lawn. I talk to my neighbors. Some of them are lifelong Democrats. They're from New Jersey. Listen, they're not ideological. Many of them aren't religious. But at the same time, they're functional people. They work. They pay bills. They love their children. You know, I'm not talking deeply philosophically. You know, I'm just talking on a basic level. They're not happy with what they're seeing.
No.
I mean, like, and this is what I'm saying, like, the country is shifting politically.
Joe, here's the problem. As we talk about at the front line with Joe and Joe all the time, okay? The problem is not the left. We know what the left wants to do. And I'm going to give the example one more time. So, because I think it's so appropriate. It's basically what it does is the example I'm going to give you is one that paints the picture in a nutshell with the problem. 5 minutes to 9 one night last year, Tucker Carlson mentioned in a quick soundbite that Jeff Bezos made $13 billion in one day, okay, in one day because of his increase in the value of his stock. Amazon's numbers came out that day. His stock went up. He increases his already over $100 billion net worth by $13 billion. Tucker Carlson called it obscene. He was correct. It was at the end of the show. So it's segueing into Hannity. Hannity chimes in, I thought, in a very unprofessional way. He should have just said, "Great show, Tucker," and then moved on. He said, "Well, you know, Tucker, that's what America's all about. Entrepreneurship and everything, and earning as much money as I'll paraphrase, earning as much money as you can, and God bless you." That's the problem right there. That's the problem, is that nobody wants to say, you want to know what? Can we have limits on wealth? Now, if you say that, a lot of people would call you a socialist. But I would say on a practical level, when you have, first of all these oligarchs are setting the conditions under which the middle class is evaporating, as you described, Joe, where the 1% has more money than the entire middle class. Okay. So the politicians and our policies are setting that. Okay. They're the ones that are, as Leo the 13th said in Rerum Novarum, they are disturbing the market and the natural order of things. They introduce things to deliberately to drive down wages. on the right and on the left, whether it's immigration, whether it's a sexual revolution, whether it's trade deals. Their goal is always the same thing, to drive down wages so that the middle class evaporates. We know that that's what it's about. But Joe, conservatives, soon as you say, you know what, we got to do something because the market has too many obstacles. It has too many anomalies. The market is not functioning well. There are too many factors that are driving wages, the market for wages down, and we need to do something about it. And conservatives go, but we can't do that. Why can't you do that? No, that's socialism. No, it's not. And here's what I want you to speak to, Joe. Government action, limited, targeted, and effective. Government action is not the same as socialism.
Well, I remember talking to Father Lewis. Father Lewis, he's the priest that kind of asked Joe and I to start this podcast 3 years ago. He's still very friendly with both our families. He works at St. Anthony's Shelter in the Bronx. And what he said, I think, was spot on. If people shared, there would be no poverty in the world. It's just a fact. I mean, today is Sunday. And basically at the mass, it was the story of the rich man. He said, you're missing one thing. Go sell your goods and give to the poor and you'll be perfect. And the man left. He went away. And Christ said, about the camel, God getting in, the eye of the needle, the camel, rich man. But it comes down to that. I mean, if people in this country shared, you're not going to go poor by sharing. And this is the difference between where people say, well, I saw in the chat room, someone said Christ would be a communist. No, he wouldn't.
No, he wouldn't. That's a lie.
Of course, Christ is not a communist, but what you have to do is share. This is not your kingdom. People don't share. I mean, people own 3 houses. People have things they don't need. I mean, if people shared, Christians, Catholics who believe in Christ, how's that? If we shared, now I don't want to do it through the government. You want to clear out a church, say that at church, watch everyone leave. I mean, one time, someone told me this, I had a doctor and he talked about a politician and this is what he said that his father used to say that he would ask every politician, Democrat or Republican. 1, how much is a gallon of milk? Do you know personally how much the milk is? And 2, how much do you contribute to the poor? You. I say this too. You say you believe in Christ, show me your checkbook. I want to see what you spend your money on. Show me your checkbook. And I'm not talking necessarily about giving all your money away. What do you spend your money on? Do you spend it on you? You see, this is what I'm talking about. If people, that's not putting God first. Let's get down into the weeds with Catholics. I had a friend of mine. I went to a Jesuit school, and some of my friends, frankly, don't practice the faith. But I will say this: they're some of the better people that I've ever met. I was telling my wife this. I have met Catholics, devout, pious Catholics, and I can compare them. And I'm not judging eternity. I'm talking about pure action. And I can compare them to people I went to school with, Jesuit school. I'll be honest with you. The people that I know, many of them don't go to church. And I'm not talking about who's going to heaven and who's not. I'm not God. I'm talking about their actions. Their actions far exceed many of the pious Catholics that I know. By far. One of my roommates has the mind of an engineer. He does not go to church. He teaches in the ghettos of LA. He could be a managing director. He's smart as the day is long. Who does that?
Right.
I'm just saying, where it's not about socialism. It's about sharing.
Well, no, it is about sharing. But then at some point, Joe, we do have to realize that. And I agree with you. Okay. And in our hearts, we should all be sharing. I actually, our foster son, and thank you for all your prayers out there, who in the next few months, he's going to become our son, our legal son. I was trying to explain to him today about the widow's mite. In other words, about how, the rich man goes into church and kind of makes a big deal about the $1 million or whatever he's giving. But the woman who has a nickel gives 2 cents, and the idea of giving from your poverty. And I tried to just impress upon this young man, say, you always have to be giving, whether in good times, bad times, up, down, or whatever. You still have to be sharing. Okay, you have to be giving of your time, of your treasure. But let's get, if you don't mind, Joe, but let's get back a little bit to what public policy should be, because you're right. And that's a lesson, by the way, that if we did do that in our own lives, we might actually translate that into economic action and support companies that, let's say, for argument's sake, do go out of their way and above and beyond for their employees, and maybe shun companies that don't. We used to do that back in the day. I remember, Joe, I'll give you a quick example. I remember when we were a lot younger, when the big beer was Coors Light. You know what I mean? Like, I remember when Coors Light first came on the scene, I think it was like in the 80s. I mean, it had been around, but it was really, and then there was, and then the idea was, I mean, growing up in Newark, don't drink Coors Light because they don't support unions. They don't support their workers. And you know what? Everybody I knew drank Bud because Anheuser-Busch is a union shop. Now, I'm just using that as a crude example, okay? But we can exert some pressure. But getting back to policy a second, and this is important because this goes back to Rerum Novarum. This goes back to Leo the 13th, where he's trying to emphasize that there is a complementarity between labor and capital. He said right up, I read it today. Okay, I told you I read it. I'm going to read the other half. I was rereading it again in anticipation for this show. Okay, that capital needs labor and labor needs capital. Do you know that, Joe, what I just said, echoing, Pope Leo the 13th, that would be considered controversial, where I wouldn't think that that's a controversial statement at all. Because if you say labor needs capital, then you're pissing off the communist, okay? Because the communists and the leftists would say, no, we'll have state ownership of the means of production. So labor just needs the government to own, let's say, all the means of production. And the right would say, no, capital doesn't need labor. I actually heard somebody say, the whole hand to the plow thing. Well, what do you mean the whole hand to the plow thing? If you have a plow and you don't have a hand applied to it, you know what the plow is going to do? It's going to get rusty and it's not going to be very useful. You need the hand of labor to move the plow. And you don't want to know what, Joe? It comes down to the same thing all the time because people are they're so entrenched in their political ideology that they refuse to give an inch on either side. That's not going to move us forward. That's not going to get us to an economy that's going to, as Leo the 13th says, provide for the common good.
Well, ultimately, though, Joe, once a company goes public, you can't. It doesn't permit you because you have a board of directors and the dividend drives the decisions.
But then, Joe, I got to cut you off. But then that has to be regulated Then that is a legitimate function of government to do something as far as impose a regulation that's going to force them to, just like they do with health insurance. The government forces employers, let's say, to one degree or another for health insurance, okay? Then that would have to be a part of the targeted action or reform of the whole board of directors system, okay? Because they shouldn't have to, it shouldn't be that we just defer to them. I think you would agree with that. We can't.
I know, but I think it's like the reality, though, that would never happen because everyone's also, when you sell stock, you owe money. People have skin in the game. It's not just you. Like what you're describing is post-industrial revolution. Like if you have a company or I own a company and it's not public, I could treat people with decency because I'm permitted to do so. Like if I owned a company, it's not public, and you worked for me and you were my foreman and you got sick, I could be like, Joe, you have a job forever. You take as long as you want. You take care of your family. But when a company goes public, the humanity gets taken out of it. I mean, not everyone who's listening to us works in corporate America. I've worked there for 23 years. I mean, I'm very versed in how the animal works. Whether you're the president or you're the janitor, you don't mean anything. You're a line on the spreadsheet. They'll fire you at will.
And it's very possible. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds on all of this, okay? Because we have more to talk about at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. But then it is very possible in the company's charter, when they come public, they can have in their charter, okay, in their founding documents, in other words, how they intend to treat their workers and the things that they have in place, okay? And then people could choose to invest in that company or not invest in that company.
But the thing is, Joe, that's talking like everyone's human, but they're not.
But they have to be, then, Joe, but then they have to be forced to be. then they have to be, and I know that's not going to go over well with a lot of our conservative friends, and I am conservative. Then the rules of the game have to change then. If the rules of the game are going to allow, or going to allow a situation where you and me and everybody out there, where we're serving the economy rather than the economy serving us, or the economy serving the common good, then sorry, then the rules have to get changed. That's the way it's got to be. In other words, and getting back real quick, I want you to comment on it. J.D. Vance, who was at the Napa Institute, he basically converted to the Catholic Church 2 years ago. Okay, he's a Republican. He's running in Ohio. And this was Lipinski writing about it. He said Vance advocated breaking up big tech. That's government intervention, Joe. Whether you like it or not, that's government intervention. Criticized tax cuts for big businesses. Okay. His fundamental premise is we should be doing what's best, not for our GDP, not for some economic abstraction, but for the people who live in this country and the children who depend on it. Joe, I can't see it as being a radical idea that, again, I'm going to say it one more time, that these corporations are an enterprise and they need to serve the interests of all those involved in that enterprise, not just the board of directors, not just the owner, not just the CEO, not just management. If you're not benefiting in a meaningful way, then what the hell good is it? That's my question.
I get it. Joe, I'm with you 100%. I mean, it's almost like that is like an idea I hear Democrats say a lot, and I agree with it on paper. They'll say, well, we're going to tax the corporation. All they do is just beat up on the people because you have corrupt people. You see, they're greedy. I mean, people don't care about people, Joe. I mean, it's sin. It comes down to that. In a just society, how could someone make $40 million a year? In a just society, be damned what Hannity said. I mean, like, you don't need $40 million a year. But, and by the way, I'll never forget it. This is a great example. I can remember during the tech bubble and it burst. This is like 2002. You were in the markets then. And I can remember when it popped and they fired tons of people. At the time I was working with Prudential Financial, their retail shop, and tons of people got fired on my floor. They sent out a yearbook, a hardcover yearbook. This is our story, mailed it to every employee at the firm. How much did that cost? Like, I took it, I threw it directly in the garbage. The book itself probably cost $200 and they had to mail it to everybody. They fired tons of people because they don't care.
Right.
I could give you example after example after example of that. People don't care about people because they don't know Jesus. You see, if you know Jesus, you care about people. It's part of the deal. You see God, and John says that in the gospel. He says this very clearly. He says, if you say you love God, who you don't see, and don't love people who you see, you're a liar. And that's what it comes down to. People value money.
No. And Joe, believe me when I get it. I understand that when these guys, let's say we were talking about publicly traded companies or very successful privately owned companies, obviously greed sets in. Oh, I made $3 million next year. Maybe next year I can make $5 million. And I get it. It's part of our fallen human nature. You know, we forget that we were broke at one point. All of a sudden you're successful. And then it's just more. But I will say this. There are practical things. Let's get back to the politics for a second, because even though we know what we're talking about here is, we want to evangelize, but politics are part of human existence. We have to deal with it. Our economic system, our political system. Okay. You're right. You're not going to legislate morality. Okay.
Can't.
But here's what you can do. But you could change the rules of the game is what you could do. Now, let me give you an example. A perfect example, I think. Okay, take baseball. I consider baseball, and I'm not the biggest baseball fan, but as a game, okay, I consider baseball to be a beautiful thing. Okay, it requires a tremendous amount of talent, both when you're playing defense and offense at the plate, throwing a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. But here's the thing: you can't play a baseball game without rules. There is no game without rules. Okay. And within the context of those rules, a Derek Jeter could go become the greatest baseball player or one of the greatest Yankees of all time, or whatever the case might be, okay? Because he operates, and all baseball players operate within the context of the rules to create something good, true, and beautiful. Because baseball is a beautiful game, okay? But there are rules. And if those rules begin to be abused, then guess what? Then those rules are going to get changed or strengthened, okay, by the authorities that create the rules. The players don't make the rules. And I think it's an appropriate analogy. In the economy, you don't make the rules, okay? The government is the one that makes the rules, and we consent to that, okay? And if they're reasonable rules, and then everybody's going to operate within it. We have nobody enforces usury laws anymore. We have usury laws in America. Nobody enforces them. People's labor get robbed. The labor of the individual American citizen gets robbed on a daily basis by greedy ass banks. Okay, so you don't have that. You have predators on Wall Street. Now they call them private equity firms. When I was there were no private equity firms. Now it's private equity firms. They could just do whatever the hell they want. They're making the rules, and that can't be allowed.
No, rules I get it, but the thing is,
and then people have to operate within those rules. Why do you have to operate within the rules, and I have to operate within the rules? But then they don't want to accept any rules.
But the Republicans will never do it, nor will the Democrats.
Because I don't agree. I don't agree. That's the point of this. I don't agree with you on that, and it's very rare that Joe and I don't agree. I do think that there's an opportunity for Republicans if they stop being ideological.
I say that they won't is because they get rich off of it. You see, like people to do that. Like very rarely do you meet a principled person in politics willing to go down with the ship. They're not. They just vote the line. This is what you're saying makes perfect sense, but I would be shocked to see it because people aren't willing to sacrifice anything. They're not willing to give their cut. They get paid. Republicans get paid just like the Democrats get paid. They're the elitists. That's partially where you have all these rhino Republicans. They're part of the machine. They're not willing to shake the tree. What you're saying is 100% right. Humanity in companies. I mean, I have lived the reality and I don't see it. I mean, and frankly, like the only way that I just don't think. As long
Joe,
as
I understand that I might be painting a little bit more of a more optimistic picture. Okay. But here's the thing. Power is still power. And enough people give, let's say, people like us, okay, and the people who would represent us and our worldview power, then as they say, I don't want to be crude, but tough. Like I would tell the Peter Singers of the world, tough. You can't buy 11% of a company, even though they're public, and then go in and then just coerce the board of directors to force them to sell. You'll fire all the middle managers and then sell the company and make $100 million in a few weeks. Sorry, you can't do it. The rules are going to change. You could get rich. This is America. You could get rich, but that you can't do. And that's just one example. These are things. This is what though, Joe, I got to say. This is what Lipinski is arguing. He's saying that you have J.D. Vance and others like him. Marco Rubio, not for nothing. We mentioned it a few weeks ago at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Marco Rubio, as he mentioned here, quoting rerum novarum, I think is a big thing. Marco Rubio has become, seemingly, as establishment as it gets. Yet he's talking about the well-being of workers and workers' rights. I do think there's an optimism, or put it like this. I think you are correct, Joe, with trying to help me to keep my feet on the ground, which you always do a good job of. Okay. But I think that I'm being a little bit more optimistic.
No, I think there's things that can be done. No question. And I think Rubio does see an opening. I think a lot of people do.
Joe Lipinski said it himself. He goes, if the Republicans would start talking more like J.D. Vance, 20. Now this is a statistic for all you out there at the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Lipinski says 20 to 30% of pro-life Democrats would leave the Democrat Party because of what they've become, but they're not willing to go to the Republicans because, I'm paraphrasing, because Republicans are not talking like J.D. Vance. And who's J.D. Vance really talking like? Pope Leo XIII. That's the whole point. You see, it's not ideological. What it does, it's in the economy, showing respect, as you said earlier, Joe. If people would just respect the dignity of another human being, That alone would go so far as to having a more just economy.
Well, I would agree with you. And that should be, again, okay, let's look at percentages. Country, 19% is Catholic baptized. If you throw Protestants in there, where it's well over 50% of America believe in Jesus Christ, which means that 1 out of every 2 people working, whether you're in a boardroom or you're in a garbage dump working, is a Christian. We don't behave like that. We don't treat people like that. You see, it comes down to behavior. You see, if enough people took their faith serious and actually thought for a second that I'm treating someone who's a child of God who's in front of me, whether I like them or not, and I have to treat them with dignity and respect, that means pay them fairly, we would have a different world. But people don't operate that way. I mean, Joe, I mean, gosh, I have seen the worst of humanity in my life. I mean, I've seen some horrendous behavior, and executed without a blink of an eye,
Right.
without a blink of an eye.
Mhm.
And it comes down. That's why all of our issues come down to Christ. The heart of man has to change. When your heart changes, you treat people differently.
Right.
And all those things you're saying, listen, it's almost like communism. Dude, communism is a great idea. It doesn't work because people aren't willing to be equal, and it doesn't work. Neither does socialism, for that matter. It doesn't work. What works is capitalism with moral boundaries. How do you do that? You instill that through a family and a religion.
You just said that but you just said, in better words than the way I put it. Okay. I was going on a little bit. You said it correctly. Free markets with moral boundaries.
That works.
That means you have to tell the Sean Hannitys of the world, Sean, there are certain things businesses cannot do.
And I have no problem with that.
I got no problem with that either.
But the thing is, but then Sean is like, my wife spends a lot of money. We always used to joke about that. Do you know how much my wife spends? Do you know how much my shore house costs? I had a friend that lived in Spring Lake Heights, and I remember crashing down there a number of years ago. And we were walking past these houses. They're like $6 million houses. He's like, Joe, I never see anyone in it. Do you imagine having so much money that you could have a shore house for $6 million and never go to it? I mean, this is what I'm talking about. People get lost in the weeds. I mean, they make ridiculous amounts of money and they could care less about people. That's why Christ said what he said. He said it's harder for a rich man to get into heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle, because of what I'm just talking about.
Right. See, and I love when people try to say that he was condemning the man. Christ was not. I
said he loved him.
It's right. It says right there. He said he looked at the rich man because he loved him. Okay. And he gave him a lesson. Why did Christ? I've thought about this, Joe, so many times over the years. I remember this was one of the things I used to think about in high school, and I wasn't even nowhere near a practicing Catholic. I always thought about that. What is Christ saying? What he's saying is, it's not because I want to exclude you from heaven, but if I tell you what to do to get there, you don't want to do it.
Well, that's right.
Why the camel will go through the eye of the needle easier, because you don't want to do it.
Well, it's because
you asked me. I never understood. Go ahead, Joe.
It's breaking the first commandment. Money, there's nothing wrong with money, but it comes with responsibility. Like it comes with responsibility. Like if you're a gifted person, you see, that's what people and like the Republican can't wrap his arms around. The idea that, yes, you're gifted, but guess what? That comes with responsibility. You're not supposed to go in the corner and say, good for me and too bad for everybody else. And I don't want the government to do it, but you have to do it. You see, that's the thing. That's what Catholic social teaching is about. I don't want to give my money to the government, but what Christ says is live modestly, take care of your family, educate them. The rest belongs to the poor.
And Joe, I was reading Rerum Novarum in anticipation of this, and even Pope Leo XIII says it even goes beyond that. The church teaches about your station in life, your position. You may be in a more prominent position. The church recognizes that not all outcomes are equal. Okay. Some people have a higher station. Like the church even allows for that. So it's not just food, shelter, and clothing for everybody. If you've achieved more, you could have more. But it's always a matter of the church emphasizing you need to use your prudential judgment to understand where that limit is. And then beyond that, it belongs to the poor.
No,
The
right.
church is,
I mean,
the people like Ann Coulter, they say the church is, she would say the church is socialist in her teaching. No, Ann, the church doesn't teach everybody just gets food, shelter, and clothing, and that's it. Absolutely not. The church recognizes there's rich, there's people in the middle, there's craftsmen, there's artisans, there's laborers, and there's poor people. The church recognizes the whole picture, okay, and has something important to say about it. Let me ask you a question about free markets. So all the free marketeers, okay, and when we say free marketeers, we're not referring to us because we are true free marketeers. We just don't bend our knee to the free market. See, we don't create and worship that idol, okay? So, Joe, what if we turn around to the Republicans, okay, and a lot of blue-collar Democrats? I was going to tell you what, well, we're going to straighten out the market. Now, we're not going to intervene in the market, but what we're going to do is this. We're going to close the border so that the left doesn't get more political power and the right doesn't get more cheap labor. We are going to have a significantly higher tax credit for families for every child they have to incentivize mothers and fathers to bring children into the world, and we're going to make it easier for them to do that. We're going to stop getting ripped off by China, Canada, Mexico, and the rest of them. Trump did a lot about that, but there's more to be done. You know what would happen to the free market? I'm going to give you an example. I watched it on my job, and I thought it was a beautiful thing. My boss came in and told me I had to go into the computer, and he gave me a whole list of names, and I had to give raises across the board to everybody who worked in the restaurant. Everybody who was a non-tipped employee had to get a raise. You want to know why, Joe? And this speaks to what we're talking about. They had to get a raise or else they were going to leave and go to another place because they were offering more money. See, that's the market at work. You want to give me $15 an hour? That guy's willing to give me $19 an hour. If you closed the border, if you promoted family life, and you did a number of other things, you know what the market for labor would do? Drive wages up, and not by 3% either, by a lot more than that. Because right now, Joe, we're in a position, I think unfairly, and this is where I blame Republicans, and you could speak to this. I think unfairly because they don't support policies that would tighten that labor market and make corporations have to compete for our labor rather than vice versa, where we just have to take whatever they're willing to give us. I think that that's an injustice. And I think that those
it is.
Well,
there is flawed.
Joe.
Joe, they're as flawed as the Democrats. I mean, clearly. Listen, it comes down to, again, what's in your heart. I mean, listen, we all make choices in life, how we behave, what we do with our money, what we're willing to do for money is another thing.
Yeah.
I mean, gosh, I've grown up with people, Joe, they'll kill somebody for money. I mean, like literally almost like they could care less to walk over a dead person on the sidewalk, not even look at him.
Well, I mean, we won't get into abortion tonight, but you have the whole culture of death. They kill babies every day for convenience and financial for financial benefit.
I mean, it's very easy to rationalize money. I deserve this and you don't. People get comfortable in a living because, again, I think it comes down to their eyes aren't on heaven. This isn't your world. This isn't, your place. You're in the valley. You're walking. If you keep that in your mind, but people rationalize things. Again, you know how much money my wife spends? You know how much money the lunch she went to yesterday cost? Right. Do you know how much money my second house mortgage is?
Right.
I got to do this. I got to do this.
Right.
She made me do it. I have to do this. No, you don't. You structured your life that way. That was a choice. So, I mean, like, this is how why do you do that? Because people want to look like they're a big shot.
That's right.
Why do people buy a $5,000 watch? Why do people spend $150,000 on a car?
Right.
Like all these choices, many of them pull into the Catholic Church. Like,
no,
again,
listen, we're not.
I mean, like, let's be real.
Excluding Catholics from this. No.
No, but I'm just saying, again, it comes down to more than 50% of Americans say they believe in Jesus. Well, your life doesn't show it. Maybe if your life showed it, the country would change. Maybe if people actually met a Christian, met one, they would say, wow, wow, you're
Right.
different. But they don't. We're
Right.
like everybody else. We say it. Christianity in America is a mile wide and an inch deep, and
Yep.
that includes the Catholic Church. Sadly,
No, you're right about that. Let's touch on this. I don't know, we'll probably go for about another 10 or 15 minutes or so. You're at the Crusade Channel, always on air, always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Frontline with Joe and Joe. Please, wherever you find us on social media, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Just quick shout out. Christine's in the chat room. Hey, Christine, what's happening? Good to see you. And all of you good people out there. So Chris Bedford, who is Catholic, okay, and I think a terrific influence out there in the media. He's one of the guys from the Federalist. And he's talking about this shift we're talking about. The one Lipinski is hoping. It seemed to me Lipinski is actually, Joe, hoping the Republicans will change, because I think he's getting fed up with his own party. He's even said, he goes, all the state legislators in Illinois that were Democrat, pro-life Democrats in his career, they've all been replaced by pro-death Democrats. Okay, so he sees the handwriting on the wall, but he's not getting anything from the other side. Here's a perfect example. Chris Bedford said the same thing that Lipinski and J.D. Vance were saying. He said the Democrat Party has become beholden to the big business it once hated so much, even at the expense of big labor and big race. Corporate money is now on their side. Wall Street, Silicon Valley, the centers of wealth chart their party's path. See, Joe, I love your comments on this. I said along that I thought my timing was off, but I think it's coming to fruition. I remember 20 years ago when I was more, just becoming a bit more politically mature, and I said, I see a realignment coming. I see it's going to be free marketeers and social liberals, pro-abortion, pro-gay marriage, the whole 9 yards, basically saying, I don't care what you do with your babies. I don't care what you do with your sex life, but stay out of my pocket. That crowd. And you're going to have not a communist or socialist, let's be clear, but a more labor-rooted party on the other side that values markets, the Pat Buchanan, let's say, worldview, which is the Catholic Leo the 13th worldview, okay? On the one hand, as far as the economy is concerned, where the economy serves the common good, all right, and also social conservatism, strengthening families, outlawing abortion, things like that, okay? That seems to be, and again, my timing was way off. I thought this would have started happening a long time ago. That seems to be what's going on here. There is a realignment, and Bedford's touching on that. He says the Democrats are now in bed with all the multi-billionaires that they profess to hate.
Bedford's article quoted Angelo Covadavilla. He's a professor at Boston University. This is what he said. He said, the ruling class appetite for difference, power, and perks grows. The ruling class wears on its sleeve the view that the rest of Americans are racist, greedy, and above all, stupid. The rulers want to be ruled, and they want everyone to obey and shut up. I mean, he's right. That's what you see. However, and I agree, the parties are flipping. There's no question. Again, the best poll is outside. Write what you see. I remember when Trump won in 2016. I live in New Jersey. I live in a Democratic area. I didn't see one Hillary Clinton sign. That was an indicator for me. Okay. Well, I talk to people now, guys who are cops. I have a state trooper that lives across. These are people who should be Democrats. They're not anymore. It's changing. Here's the problem, though. Our debt is off the charts.
Well,
Americans don't know how to live anymore, Joe. We live above our means. We're leveraged up the hole, in plain English. We no longer how to live. And who talks about this in his book, Return to Order, is John Horvat. Eventually, it's going to all fall apart. I'm going to tell you this right now. If I had money, like a lot of money, this two things I would buy right now: gold and land. I would buy gold and land because it's tangible. Eventually, we're going to have hyperinflation, and a country is going to implode from an economic perspective. It's not going to matter what party you belong to. You're going to have the uber rich, and you're going to have everyone else in the friggin' gutter. And that's how South America works. That's how most of the world works.
Well, if Republicans want to have American values, what they talk about, and Americanism and exceptionalism and entrepreneurism, okay, which we all agree with on that, then it gets back to what you said earlier, and I think that what Pope Leo the 13th alluded to in Rerum Novarum. Then you have to kill the idols that you've created. You mentioned Jesus Christ earlier, which we're always supposed to refer to Jesus Christ, okay, because he's the way, the truth, and the life, okay? He is the one that we worship. And like you said, you got 50% of Americans who are self-identified Christians that worship many, many other things other than Jesus Christ. Maximizing profits. That's not an idol. I want profits. I want companies to be profitable, all right, or else there's no company. All right. Even the popes have said that. Okay. If you don't have a profit, you don't really have a company. So, but maximizing profits, economic growth at all costs. In other words, bowing to the free market, as we alluded to earlier. No, those are idols, false idols, and they need to be killed. And Republicans, and I think this is the whole point of the conversation tonight, if Republicans want to seize a golden opportunity to have a true free market, a true, like you said, Joe, a free market with moral boundaries, all right, that benefits the common good, benefits families, all the things that disgust the right, the gay marriage, the genderism, and all that, these politicians would have no power. The Gavin Newsoms of the world, this idiot in Pennsylvania who's saying he wants to force men to have vasectomies because in response to the heartbeat law, they'd have no power if Republicans would just give this much, because really that's what Lipinski is saying. He says, stop talking about making rich people richer and start talking about making people in the middle class more prosperous and raising people out of poverty. And you know what? They would rule that view. I'm not saying that would even be a Republican party. Maybe it'd be a new name for the party. But either way, that party that took those positions along with social conservatism on moral issues, okay, that party would rule for a very, very, very
Joe,
long time.
I agree with you. And frankly, I do think, and this is why I've always said, enjoy your hour, this crowd. It will be short, their reign, because frankly, I think they've overplayed their hand. I also think the Latino vote is going to go to the GOP a lot more so than it has. And the black vote in the GOP is growing. So they're in trouble. If, like, in all honesty, and I'll tell you this, even people like Nancy Pelosi despise the squad. I am sure she despises AOC as much as she despises Trump. They actually get it in terms of like a winning ticket for the Democratic Party. They don't. They don't relate to regular people, and it's going to wind up hurting them. But overall, as a country, we don't know how to live anymore. People don't know how, Joe, they don't know how to live. I'm going to tell you this. And again, your eyes are the best poll. Look how people live. Right. They will leverage on a credit card. You work at a restaurant. How many of those people have the money to spend on that meal? Literally, they could actually not, and I'm not talking about the corporate plastic because that's different. Right. I'm talking about the people that come in there and spend that money that they're spending 20-something% interest on to eat there, so they could take a picture on Facebook and show everybody that they're at a fancy restaurant. Well, yeah, we don't know how to live. And that's the underlining. That transcends politics. People haven't been taught how to live. And their parents witness it. You drive by any garden apartment in America. There's many people in the chat room. Look at the cars in the garden apartment. A garden apartment is a place where you're to be transitioning into a home. You'll see people, they'll have a Land Rover in Lodi, New Jersey, in a garden apartment. I say to myself, what the heck are you thinking? We don't know how to live. And that's why Horvat gets it. The prodigal son will return when it implodes, and it's going to.
Oh, well, that's the thing. Listen, people, you can forget about the federal debt. All right. Just the individual debt. Like you said, we say it all the time at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. Buying things you don't need with money you don't have so that you can impress somebody. You've now just become welcome to the club. You've now just become a slave. Now
Bingo.
You're a slave to the banks.
Joe, I call it the slave tax. There are people who live the same life ultimately that you or I live, and the slave tax is off the hook because this is the remedy for it. I'm telling you right now, people, listen to my voice. When you do your taxes, calculate all your compound interest on your cars, your credit card, and your mortgage. Do it for a year, put it on your refrigerator, circle it in red, and look at it every single time you open your refrigerator. The privilege to have what you have in a number, the cost that you're paying to the bank, who, by the way, is laughing at you.
They're
I
laughing.
work at the bank. They're laughing at you.
They're laughing all the way to the bank.
And this is the truth, but this is America. We don't know how to live anymore, and this is why it's all going to fall apart.
Well, that's why
don't own anything.
Joe, we're bringing it up to the end of the show. I think it's a very important conversation. Okay, I think that all these places, whether it's the Napa Institute, wherever influential people are, they need to start thinking of these things. Interesting story. And I think it was very telling to me. I saw Pat Buchanan. It was a video from a number of years ago, but it was Pat Buchanan and Ralph Nader, now a socialist, and Pat Buchanan, who obviously Pat Buchanan is a faithful Catholic and is an anti-communist. Okay, Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan reminiscing about when they both supported Jimmy Hoffa and the labor movement and labor rallies. And one, they were mentioning a place on the West Coast they had gone to. My point is, this is Ralph Nader and Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan is not a communist, and Ralph Nader is not really what you would call a capitalist. Okay, but what did they have in common? They did not like the way labor was being treated, the way workers were being treated, and they supported Jimmy Hoffa, in other words, and the protections that he was trying to get for his workers. I'm a direct beneficiary of that. My father was a Teamster for 35 years. Okay, without a union, in other words, we would not. We would not have been able to go to school. We went to good schools because my father was able to afford it. That's the bottom line, and it's because of the labor movement. Now we could go on for hours about that. That was corrupted over time. Leo the 13th actually has something to say about that, but we have to end it there. Joe, final comments for the Crusade Channel crowd tonight.
Well, I guess ultimately it comes down to what you value. You know, like, what is your value? I mean, do you treat people the way they should be treated? Do you put mammon above God? I mean, it comes, Joe, it could be boiled down to that. Whether you employ 100 people or, frankly, you just run your household. What do you put above God? And, frankly, get your priorities in order. They say if you put God first, everything else falls in line. If our country did that, everything falls in line, Joe.
Everything would fall in line. And it would go back to being not the great country that it was. It would be greater.
Oh, no question. It would be
much, much, much greater. And I think that's the important thing. Please, all of you good people out there at the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Please, wherever you see Joe and I on either Frontline TV or Frontline with Joe and Joe, YouTube, Facebook, a whole host of places, do something to help us out. Whatever you could do would be great. Patreon.com, Joe and I are on there. Patriot.com/the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Of course, we want to thank you all for all your support, you Crusaders out there, the support we get from King Dude. And we're really growing our little project here. Remember, Veritas Catholic Radio Network, we have our Sunday afternoon interview show on AM radio in the New York metropolitan area. Please be sure to download the Veritas Catholic Network radio mobile app. And we want to thank you for listening to us on the Crusade Channel, your home for the Mike Church Show, Crusade Channel News, the Barrett Brief, and the Kennedy Profession. From sunup to sundown, the Crusade Channel is the last live radio station standing.